Hello everyone. Let's talk about the Solarwinds attack. Solarwinds is one of the largest software company that provides various products to monitor the network, system, application, and cloud services. It's widely used software. The attack was related to the Solarwinds Orion product, which includes network monitoring, configuration manager, application, database monitoring, a log analyzer, and they have around like 33,000 customers across the US. This attack was one of the largest and most sophisticated ever. Let's look at the impact of this attack. 18,000 customers were affected out of 33,000. That means more than 50% customers were affected. Over 425 of the US Fortune 500, the top 10 US telcos, all 5 branches of US military, the top 5 US accounting firms, the Pentagon, the State Department, NSA, Department of Justice, and the White House. I don't think so we can top this list. Now, the real impact of this attack, we don't know yet. Hackers were undetected in this network for at least 6 months. So it's going to be very time consuming and costly process to get the real sense of damage. Now let's look at the attack timeline. So the Solarwinds network was breached around October 2019, and around the same time they started testing the modification of the Solarwinds software. And December 2019 they acquired C2 domains. Now these were the domains where the malware was set to communicate to, and these domains were activated in February 2020. Now the first update that came out in March 2020 was the first indication of Backdoor Solarwinds package. And right after 1 month, in April 2020, it was the first indication of the victim communication to those C2 domains. And the last identified malicious update was in June 2020. And all of these got exposed in December 2020. So all the way from the first update in March 2020 and everything got exposed in December 2020, that's 8 months. During that 8 months, 18,000 customers were affected, including the list we just saw. Now, this was a software supply chain attack. Let's look at that. In order to understand software supply chain attack, let's take a look at a typical software supply chain first. What you see over here are various stages that a typical software development goes through. From planning to coding, testing, all the way operating, monitoring, and back to planning. And the cycle basically continues. In the case of Solarwinds, the malware was injected in the code building stage. From there, it went to testing, undetected, and digitally signed by Symantec, and it was released. Now, this malware had a delayed action. That means after you install, you don't see any unusual traffic. But after 12 or 14 days, it would execute the code and communicate back to those C2 domains, calling home. Now, it had this delayed action to avoid the sandbox detection. Now, what you see over here is how every single software gets developed. They all go through similar stages. And software supply chain is hot target right now for the hackers. And because it's an easy way to get into someone's network. And as DHS said last year, there very well it could be other softwares out there with the similar issues. So the question is, how do we protect our network from this type of attack? Now, what happens in software supply chain right here, you cannot control. But what you can control is how that piece of software operates within your network. Now, in order to stop backdoor attacks, let's first take a look at weaknesses of typical network topology. It's a two-step process. Now, what you see over here is a very typical network that you see all the time we have a firewall with the 3 zones: outside, inside, that goes back to the network, DMZ, it goes to the DMZ server. The web server over here is open from the outside. And on the core switch, we have multiple VLANs, servers, users, wireless. We have servers over here on the right side, typical domain controllers, file server, backup server, they're all going back to the core switch. And then we have access switches where we have our computers and wireless access points are connected, or printers or anything. Now, there are real weaknesses for this network. For example, a Bob over here in sales is a troublemaker. He likes to click everything and anything. Now, every workplace has one Bob, and you may be lucky and multiple Bob. But let's see Bob receives the phishing email and he clicks on it and gets infected. Now, the hacker has now control of the Bob's computer, and what the first thing he would like to do is get access to the domain controller. And it's easy way to identify domain controller's IP address because you just run the IP config and you can see what's the IP address of your domain controller. But normally what the hacker do, they scan the network, find out all the different subnets, and it's very easy to identify the server subnets. So the first goal for the hacker would be to penetrate the domain controller. So now he would start using different tools to see how he can get into the domain controller. And it's nothing between them to stop that. You may have this antivirus, but if the antivirus worked, then we never had this concept of ransomware. So there's nothing in between them that would stop that attack. He would try different tools and he would eventually succeed. That's how they get there. Now, once the hacker is on the domain controller, he has access to the entire network, including your file server, backup server, and all the computers. So first thing he would do is, nowadays what they do is they search for the files that is confidential, if it has credit card information or anything that is useful to them, and he would send out this file back to his home. Now the next step would be to encrypt the file server or any other critical servers and destroy the backup if they get into the backup server, and you get the nice ransom note in the morning. Now, this is how usually all the typical ransomware attacks goes down. If it's targeted, it will be more damage. If it's a low-level hacker, he may just not try to spend too much time to get into the domain controller and just try to encrypt the network share that Bob has access to. That's a less damage. But nowadays, what we see out there, they are sophisticated attacks. So how do we stop this? How do we stop Bob's computer accessing the domain controller? Now, we do need certain ports to communicate because it's a domain joined machine. But how can we prevent this? It's actually very simple. You see over here the core switch. The role of core means this is your core switch. That's where all the routing happens. So all the traffic between the VLANs comes over here and the switch will route them where to go. So if the traffic is coming from VLAN 10 and trying to reach to the VLAN 20, the core switch is the one that directs them. This is where all the routing happens. A simple fix would be move the core switch role to your firewall. And that would fix the biggest weakness of your network. Let me show you that. So if you make your firewall as a gateway / router, in this topology, what you are doing is you are removing the IP addresses of all the VLANs from your core switch and moving them to the firewall. So basically over here, all you have is VLAN 20 without IP address. You are just still tagging the VLANs. And on your firewall, now in this example, I have firewall with the multiple ports. It doesn't have to be. If you only have like 3 ports, you can still do it. You can just configure the port in trunk and tag the VLAN. But in this example, I'm using separate port for each VLAN. So what I'm doing over here is I'm creating a separate. So before we had three zones, right? Outside, inside, and DMZ. Now I'm creating a security zone for every single VLAN. So I still have my outside DMZ, but now I have a security zone for my server VLAN, my user VLAN, and now I also have the IT VLAN. Now this is where you want to put, if you are the IT admin, this is where you want to put your computer. You don't want to talk to the Bob. You don't want Bob computer to see you. So this is where you put your computer, because your computer has more access to the network than the user computer would need. Right next to it, we have wireless VLAN, and then the management IT VLAN, and the last backup slash hypervisor VLAN. Usually I keep the backup and VMware in the same VLAN, so that way the backup runs on the layer 2 and doesn't have to go through the firewall. Now the router slash VPN users, the remote VPN users, there's also a separate security zone. I'll explain why. So just to recap what we did, we basically moved all our IP addresses from the core switch, just tagging the VLAN, moved everything to our firewall. And we are on firewall, we have multiple security zones now. Now, normally, you know how you create the rule from inside to DMZ, DMZ to inside, what you want to allow. Now that's what you want to create now. For example, now you can create the rule based on the application and ports rather than just any. So my user and wireless security zone needs to communicate with the server, but only to my domain controller and file server. So for my domain controller, I would just open up the role apps that domain controller would need. That would LDAP, all the authentication related ports, 389, DNS, DHCP ports, only that specific ports. And same for the file server, it only needs SMB2 or SMB3 protocol. It doesn't need any other ports. So now I'm locking it down from user to my server using my application-based or port-based policy. And because the IT needs to access these servers, I'm allowing the RDP and management apps to access to my server from my IT VLAN. That way, if user tries to RDP to the domain controller, they are not going anywhere, because right here, that's going to get block all the traffic. So the IT is allowed to do RDP management to the server, and IT is also allowed to add to the management VLAN. Now, normally the management VLAN is where you want to put the switch management IP address, the ILO management IP address, anything that you manage on your network, you want to put them on the management VLAN. That's its own separate VLAN. So from the user wireless perspective, they cannot reach to the management, backup, IT. Nope, you cannot access this. It would get blocked. That's not the only advantage. Now, because if the traffic goes through, let me just clear this. Now, as the traffic now try to goes through from these, it's not going to go over here, but instead it has to go from over here and then come back. But now the firewall has the log. So every single RDP attempt or any other attempt to your domain controller or any physical server, you have the clear visibility on your firewall. Before, over here on the core switch, it's impossible to track that down. Now you can actually see what's going on. And not only that, now this most expensive firewall that you have out there can actually apply all the IPS threat prevention policies, and you can inspect the traffic now. So if the Bob is trying to do something not he's supposed to do, your firewall will catch that and block that. And then you can look at the threat log and you can identify, okay, this machine needs some attention. This is this would kind of makes your network more secure, and it gives you really good visibility. Now, talking about these remote VPN users. Now, these days, due to COVID, a lot of people work from home. It's very important to secure that traffic. I never liked the remote VPN, that concept where it opens up the whole network from the computer. I usually prefer VDI or other ways to connect, where it's not opening up the whole network. But no, it's not possible everywhere. Now, by the way, I'm using the Palo Alto firewall in this example. You can use any firewalls. If you have Cisco, Checkpoint, SonicWall, you can still do this. Now, back to the remote VPN users. So if the remote VPN is a laptop that is part of domain, once they are connected, you can allow them to the Active Directory, file server, web server, or whatever the server VLANs they need to access to those specific ports. but everything else get blocked. There's no reason for them to look into the backup management or even the user VLAN. Once you are connected, you can access the server. The second option is, if you don't want them to connect to directly the server, Active Directory file server, I actually prefer this option. You can allow that user to RDP to their user computer uh, from the home computer after the VPN, and everything else is blocked. Now, in this case, you can even drill it down to that specific user to specific IP address. So basically, reserve the IP address in the DHCP every time they use the same IP address. And on the firewall rule, you can just have this user is coming, the username is allowed to connect to this IP address only. This is more secure approach than this one for obvious reasons. But this is how you basically lock it down. From app ports, now all these apps, when I talk about the apps, it's the layer 7 applications. Nowadays, all these firewalls are layer 7 firewalls, so they have the application, which I'm actually going to show the demo, which identifies every single application from your network, from Netflix to Zoom meeting or WebEx meeting. It identifies every single application. Now, this is a step one. Basically, you are making your network, configure your network the right way, and have more visibility and more control access. Now, let's look into the step two. Now, let's talk about step two, securing your network from the backdoor attacks, and it's all about internet policy. Now, we are talking about outbound internet policy over here. Inbound, it's not the issue over here. It's all about outbound internet policy. So typically, we have three types of policy. Any, basically wide open, no restriction, and widely used, unfortunately. And then we have port-based policy, little secure. You're allowing only certain ports like port 80 and 443. And the third one is app-based policy, the most secure policy you can have. Is basically all the layers on firewalls identify every single traffic and associate it with the application. So it's Dropbox or Google Base, Office 365, team traffic, it identifies them. So you can create the policy that basically you are saying, okay, you know what? I want to allow Teams, Office 365 apps, Google apps, but I don't want to allow Zoom meeting, just for example. You can control that using the app-based policy. Now, it matters how you take the approach towards the internet. Typical approach, we have the block list approach, right? Where most of the time you will see social media allowed, streaming allowed, just the general internet. But what about, there are like 96 categories, 92, 96 categories in the URL filtering, and we are only focusing on that default 10 that says block adult, block malware, block phishing sites. But what about the other sites? Instead of the block list approach, go towards the whitelist approach. Mix of restricted internet / no internet. Let me explain. So normally for user wireless security zone, you allow general applications that they need to use for day to day and lock it down on the sites. I'll actually show you the production Palo Alto in a minute. You want to lock it down, what they can access on the internet. And on IT, you can add more stuff because you may need to access a little bit more than the regular user. Now for the server, this is where it gets really important. For limited servers, they need limited internet, but most of the servers, they don't need internet connection. And the backup and management should never be connected to the internet. Now you would ask, like, how do I update my servers? Microsoft updates, or what if I have cloud-based antivirus? Well, that's what you can control using the applications. Let me explain. Let's take a look at this production Palo Alto firewall. What you see over here are the application groups that are pre-configured, and one of the application group that I would like to show you is critical apps. So this is basically my top rule in my firewall. Every computer servers are allowed to use this. So this is how I'm getting my Microsoft update. In this case is a SentinelOne and Symantec, two antiviruses. They are both connected, and that way these are the most critical apps that I want to make sure that every single computer servers in my network access to. Now, if you have actually internal Windows Update server, then you don't even need MS Update, only the antivirus thing. Uh, this is very critical because that way you can limit the exposure to the internet from your server side. Now, any other critical application that you have, you can just add it in the list. Palo Alto has basically the entire app database. Let me show you these applications. These are built in. They update this app database every few days. So you can see like different categories as different apps, like for example gaming or general business apps. You can lock it down what you want to allow. That's why the whitelist approach is a lot better approach than just the blocking, because so much you can block, but you can always control what you can allow from your network. And they update these apps regularly, so it's very important to control them. Now let me show you my domain controller internet policy, which is locked down basically. So it's going from DC1, DC2, going outside, and only allowing two applications, DNS and NTP. That's all my domain controller needs. DNS to resolve the domain names, and NTP to get the right time from the internet. Now you can see over here also the destination address. I have locked it down rather than lock it down to only allowing to US, whitelisting only US. So even if they do this DNS query and NTP query, they're only allowed to the US IP addresses. And it's also very important. I mean, most of the time we try to do geo blocking for incoming connection, but outbound connection is also very important. And actually, I'm going to show you that in the next video. Now, going back over here, so you can see it's only two, and then I have another rule that just says deny everything else. That's all my domain controller needs, two apps. And let me show you my URL filtering policy for my domain controller. So domain controller has block categories 92, allowed categories 0. So basically it's blocking every single website. Now what I'm allowing is I have a whitelist over here for my domain controller where I'm saying I want to allow the duo security wildcard I'm using over here because that's I have two-factor authentication on my domain controller. So I want to make sure my computer can communicate back to the duo security. And I also want to allow the Microsoft.com. There are certain services that for example, activating the Office, Microsoft OS, and certain other services rely on this site. So I added there. Now, any other site you may have, you can add it over here. But going back to the Solarwinds attack, we also use that software in our data center. Luckily, we didn't have that version. But even if we had that version, it's not going anywhere. My Solarwinds is completely off the internet. It doesn't have internet access. That's why it matters. Any management software on your computer, on your network, it could be patch management or any kind of software, block the internet access. There is no reason for them to have the internet access. The only thing that need internet access is your antivirus updates because it gets the new signatures. Firewall needs internet access to download the new security updates. Those are the most critical ones. Now there are different cases, but you can still narrow it down instead of opening the wide internet. So that's my domain controller policy. Now let me also show you actually a firewall with the recent ransomware attack, just to show you what kind of traffic that one had. All right, so this is the screenshot, not the screenshot, actually the live firewall that had a recent ransomware attack. And what you see over here is my last 30 days traffic to my network. What you see the source IP on the left side, these are incoming traffic. And what you see on the destination country, that's my outbound traffic from the network. And They got the ransomware attack recently, but the hacker was in the network for 2 months. It took a while for a hacker to breach the network because Palo Alto was blocking those attempts from inside to outside. Unfortunately, nobody was looking at the firewall log. They were log every single day about the attempt from inside to outside. All they need to do was to look at the computer, see what's going on. So that's another thing. It's very important to look at the log of the firewall. You can buy the most expensive firewall. It's like any car. Like if you don't know how to drive, then it's useless. So it's important that someone looking at the log every single day to see what's going on in your network. Just basically run the report for last 24 hours. Now going back over here, the hacker was from Netherlands. Sometimes it could be from other country, but they use the proxy, and we trace the traffic back to the Netherlands. And you can see over here, actually this is last 30 days, but if I run the last 2 months, they uploaded 12 gig of data. So in their ransomware node, actually they had the screenshot that, hey, we have your files, confidential files. If you don't pay the ransom, we're going to release this file to the internet. And those screenshot obviously shows the internal files that were actually on the file server they got. So he spent time to collecting those files, and after collecting those files, he encrypted. And not only the every single server, they also destroyed the backup. Now, luckily, the client had a tape backup, so they got lucky with that. And we recovered everything and got it up and running. And right now, everything looks okay. But they actually left a lot of computers infected, kind of backdoor entry. So we had to secure every single machine before we can actually allow the outbound internet. But as you can see over here, like now they do have business in these two countries, so it's obvious traffic. But there are other countries that you see the traffic over here, and you wonder like what's going on, like why there is a traffic to Germany or Finland. If your company has no business in those countries, what's going on? Now, sometimes there's a legit traffic. Even Microsoft sometimes pulls update from overseas. I don't know why, but they do. But at least you want to investigate, see what's going on. Is that the legit traffic or not? Um, so make sure that you review the outbound traffic, what's going on, and if possible, most of the sites, if you only allow US, Canada, um, and certain sites rely heavily on UK too, but lock it down your outbound connection as well. Inbound, always use the geo blocking. Basically, just block the connection from incoming. For example, let's see what we have over here. As you can see, block from outside. China, Iran, North Korea, these are high list. Palo Alto known high risk IP addresses. We block a lot of countries for incoming connection, but you also want to restrict that for outbound connection. Now let's talk about the user and password policy. So during SolarWinds breach, malware helped the hacker to get inside the network, but they still needed different logins to move within the network. And in some instances, they were able to guess the password. So it is very important to review your user and password policy time to time. First, we have users should not have admin rights on local computer. This is very important. With admin rights, user can execute any file or script. So make sure user is not part of local admin group. And if you have any program that requires admin rights, try to give user full permission on that specific program folder. In most cases, it works. Don't log in with domain admin accounts to PCs. Anytime you log in on any PC, it stores the password hashes locally. So make sure to create dedicated account to join PC to domain as well as log into user's PC for support. And normally I recommend to keep that account kind of disabled, only enable when you require, and change the password more frequently for those accounts. Review your domain admin group members regularly. because time to time we have to add users in domain admin group, either for a specific task or for some software to work, and with the time we don't remember those changes. So review the domain admin group members time to time, make sure only authorized persons are in there. And if you have some kind of SIM solution in place, you can also get the email alerts for add and remove the group members from the domain admin or even the local administrator groups from the local computers. If you don't have any SIM solution, you can actually go to our highlink.com blog site. My colleague Rushi has written a blog on this, basically a simple PowerShell script which you can just schedule to run on your domain controller regularly, and it will send the alert on member add or remove from domain admin groups as well as local administrator group on the PC. We'll share the link with everyone at the end. Retain the Active Directory logs for minimum 6 months. As you can see from the Solarwinds breach, sometimes we don't know for months for certain exploits. And in order to track it down, what went wrong, we need these logs. I also have seen multiple times where hackers have deleted the Windows logs completely to hide their traces. So make sure to send the log from Active Directory, Firewall, and all the critical servers to your syslog server. I would recommend to keep it for 1 year, but minimum 6 months. The last two actually goes together. The change password policy every 90 days as well as number of characters matters in your password. Now, let me share the recent conversation I had with my friend about the password security. As I was explaining to him, it's not about the uppercase, lowercase, or special characters. It's about the number of characters you have in your password. And he said like he has very strong password, kind of impossible to break it. First of all, don't use the word impossible when it comes to the password. And I said, well, what's your secret? He said he has 3 special characters, 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, 1 number. So total 6 characters. Now let's do a math. So this is the site where you can actually see how secure your password is. Over here, it would give you the combination based on your characters and the number of digits. It would give you the number of combination and how long it will take to crack that password. Now, if you can see over here, the password cracking speed 1 million per second. So just to give you the idea, we are looking at the low-end graphics card. I mean, even if you have 5 years old graphics card on your computer for gaming, it would do better than this. But I'm just going to leave it to 1 million per second for now. And let's see how strong my friend's password is, right? So he has lowercase, uppercase, number, and special character. And number of passwords, 6 digits, 164 billion combination, and won't even take 2 days to crack it. And that's with the low-end graphics card. Let me just show you what's out there. So over here we have a 25 GPU cluster for all these graphics card, and just guess how many password it can guess per second. 350 billion password guess per second. That's just ridiculous. Now over here, let's set 200 billion. Let's give more discount. I mean 6 digits, it don't even have a chance. 1.64 seconds to crack it. But if you notice on this side, as you go higher in number of characters and digits in your password, it gets harder and harder. Even with 100 billion per second guess for 11 digit, just look at the difference between the 10 digit and 11 digit. 10 digit, you're looking at 1.5 years, but if you have 11 digit password, it's 115 years. Now that's the key. I recommend to have the password with 12 characters. Now we are talking about this password guessing, but these hackers actually also have the script how they crack the password. For example, if you have special characters in your password right now, most likely is one of these or a combination of these. Most of them have these passwords. For your business, most likely your password contains your address, maybe street name, building number, established year of your business would be included in your password. It's not that hard to guess. That's kind of like it's how we think basically. When we come up with the password for our personal password, we go with our year, but birth year is very common. Once you get older, you choose the birth year for your kids. Uh, that's just how we think. Um, Now, if I ask you to create the 12-digit password, it's always hard to come up with those passwords if you think about and even remembering them using the special characters, uppercase, lowercase. That's not possible. Instead of that, go with the phrases. Phrases are actually very easy to remember. It could be anything you like, anything you don't like. If you don't like someone, those are always easy to remember. For example, I'm a New York Yankee fan, and I can't stand Red Sox. Even Jim is actually a Red Sox fan for some reason. I don't know how. So if I use my password, I can't stand Red Sox, right? That's very easy to remember for any Yankee fan. So let's count the digits, how many digits we have. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So I got 17 letters right here. And it includes one special character, right? So let's go back my speed over here. I was 100 billion. Now I feel confident. I'm just going to go 10 tera per second. All right, so I'm 12 digits is going to take 85 years, so I'm good. And even if actually that's not true, I don't have numbers. I do have uppercase, lowercase, and one special character. All right, so even with the 12 digit, it takes 15 years, and I'm way above 12 digits, so I'm safe. Now you are changing this password every 3 months. That breaks this chain basically. That's why it's important to change your, at least for domain admin accounts, password every few months. Because hacker can retrieve the hashes of your password from the servers, and then they run it through this graphics card to crack them. Now we are not talking about the country that can go after you like China or Russia. They have supercomputers, so that's a whole different story. But the regular people, you're probably looking at around this range. So if you have 12 digits, you are safe. It's not easy to crack. And again, go with the phrases. It's always easy to remember. Okay, so last item that I like to cover is two-factor authentication. This will be very quick. So two-factor authentication, I mean, as we talk about all this password combination and everything, is always good to have two-factor authentication. You want to make sure all your critical servers as well as all the cloud application is protected. Now, one thing for Office 365 users, and nowadays everybody's on Office 365, the two-factor authentication is actually free, is included. Make sure to enable that because there is no geo-blocking feature on the base license with Office 365, so anyone can log in from anywhere. And the way people use the 365 with the OneDrive, started uploading the sensitive files over there, it can get compromised very easily. So make sure if you have users on 365, enable two-factor authentication. Now, let me show you the product that we use, Cisco Duo, just to see if it's not possible for you to get for all the users, for the computers or VPN access, you can still protect your servers and infrastructure on the IT side for at least actually free for up to 10 users, which should be more than enough to cover small to medium businesses. So let me show you that. So you can just go to the duo.com, duo.com, and sign up for your business. The 10 accounts are actually free, and you can at least protect all the IT under the two-factor authentication. So one of the things it basically has is if you look at on the left side, the applications. So you can actually protect a lot of applications, not only on site but also the cloud. But the certain applications that I prefer for protecting inside the network, it's one of them is RDP. So as we talk about like before, how we segmented the network and everything, but your backup server should be protected with the two-factor authentication. So you can easily basically download the exe file, run on it, protect your application, install whatever the key and everything, and when you log in next time, it would ask for the uh, do a push notification, call, or SMS to log in after successfully authenticating. It's very important for the backup server. I have seen recently the hackers actually interact with the backup software, Veeam, Symantec backup, and they delete the backup because they know that if you recover your backup, you're not going to pay them ransom. So make sure the RDP app is actually very important to protect your um, all the critical servers. I usually install on domain controller, file server, and backup server. Now, when you install these, you will have option to not only protect the RDP but the local access too. I usually avoid them because in case if the Duo is down, I can still connect with the KVM to my machine, just like a way for me to access offline. Now they do have that option, but I don't select that option usually. I want to make sure even if they are offline, the RDP should not be allowed from any other unauthorized sources. Now, it's not just the RDP, it also protects the user account control, UAC. So you know how if you try to install a software, it would require the are you sure you want to run this, yes or no. It also can control that. So basically, if you need trying to execute any script, PowerShell script, or any uninstall or install software, it would send the push notification to confirm that it's you that doing this. So it's a very good application, and on the IT side, it's literally free for 10 up to 10 user accounts. So make sure you create the account, and not only that, you would keep the all the logs in detail. Basically that way you can look into it, like user activities from where they logged in last time. Now I'm logging from the VMware view, so it doesn't grab the IP, but usually it would show you the IP address where they're connecting from. And not only that, you can also control with the policies, if you want to bypass the two-factor authentication for certain IP address like authorized networks, you can do that. You can also control if you want to what kind of authentication method you want to use, SMS, phone call, Duo push. They do have a hardware token as well, because I know a lot of people are used to their RSA tokens. You can also get the hardware tokens if you have to use it. But normally, if you anything open outside, VPN should be protected with the two-factor authentication, as well as all the internal critical servers. It's a kind of like a cherry on the top of your 12-digit password. In the end, everyone wants to be more secure as long as this isn't an inconvenience. But the fact is, security is an inconvenience. Just think about airport security. Right? No one likes it. I mean, everyone has those stories, but we still go through it so we can fly safely. When it comes to the cybersecurity, inconvenience is actually little price you pay for security. And over the years, I've been part of few ransomware recoveries, and I can tell you that you don't want any of that. It's frustrating and exhausting. Though the first few days are really hard, where you have to not only secure every single endpoint as well as the getting everything up and running from the backup. A lot of pressure, and that I feel as a consultant, I cannot imagine what the client actually goes through. It's not just about recovering, but it's also about job security for them. So I can understand these changes are not that easy to go through, but at the same time, these are very critical steps that we need to take, because as you can see that every day is a new threat. I mean, at this moment we may have a software in our network that has the same issue as SolarWinds, and no one can guarantee you, right, that no, it's safe. Nobody knows that. So the hackers are getting a lot smarter, and we also have to do the same. But with patience and with the proper planning, I think this can be achieved. And here at Highlink, we are always there for you guys and for any guidance or any help. And thank you everyone for joining today.